The Stigmas of Mental Illness by Marco Blalin. At the root of this dilemma is the way we view mental health in this country. Whether an illness affects your heart, your leg, or your brain, it's still an illness, and there should be no distinction. Michelle Obama. The main points I'm going to get in this presentation is that stigma placed on mental health creates a certain attitudes in the general public, which then affects people with mental illness. Some vocabulary definitions are the word stigma, a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person; mental disorder, conditions that affect one's thinking, feeling, mood, and behavior. These can either be occasional or chronic. Narcissism, selfishness, involving a sense of entitlement, lack of empathy, and a need for admiration as a characterizing personality type. And psychopathy, a neuropsychiatric disorder marked by deficient emotional response, lack of empathy, and poor behavioral controls. What are the stigmas that the media portrays of mental illness? There are three types of stigmas that a person can have: social stigma, public stigma, and self-stigma. Social stigma is the disapproval or discrimination against a person based on characteristics. Public stigma is the negative or discriminatory actions that others have about mental illness. And self-stigma is those with mental disorders perceive the public stigma, internalize the negative attitudes, and then apply the stigma onto themselves. These stigmas are usually made up by people seeing mental illness portrayed in media. Whether through films, social media, or news, the general public still gets an impression about individuals with mental illnesses in real life. Some theories of why people have stigma towards mental health are the cultivation theory, which is when people who spend time watching the virtual world on TV may perceive the real world like on the screen; and the social learning theory. The learning is achieved through direct experience and observations. An example of the social learning theory is whenever a child imitates a family member, in which the child repeats the action if the behavior is rewarded. Examples of stigma in media, which this one is called The Joker. The movie portrays a character named Arthur Fleck who has mental issues, presumably narcissism and psychopathy. He worked as a clown but is then isolated, disregarded, and mistreated by society. Over time, all the events happening in his life then turn him into the Joker, which is his alter ego. The film contains many graphic scenes in which Arthur's life slowly goes downhill as a notorious criminal. Researchers have found that the film was associated with higher levels of prejudice towards mental illness, which can then leave an impression on the people watching the film, which feeds into the cultivation theory. Also, psychopathy is not an actual diagnosis from medical professionals, but is instead a part of the symptoms of ASPD, antisocial personality disorder. Another example is the film Split. The movie is about a man named Kevin Crumb in which he has DID, dissociative identity disorder. He is diagnosed with having 23 personalities and he becomes a violent kidnapper. The teenage girls who got kidnapped by Kevin then have to escape before his 24th personality comes out, which is called the Beast. The actual symptoms or causes of DID are amnesia, loss of sense of self, depression, anxiety, distorted reality, detachment of oneself and their emotions, and it stems from traumatic experiences. The movie portrays an inaccurate portrayal of a person with DID because the film presents the disorder in an over-exaggerated way. The film also depicts people with DID to be crazy and violent. How do the stigmas affect people with mental illness? Due to all the stigma, stereotypes, and misconception about mental illness, individuals with mental health disorders might have certain symptoms or events that can cause their mental health to become worse, like isolation, bullying, physical violence, increasing psychiatric symptoms depending on the mental disorder, reduced self-esteem, reduced hope of getting better, and increase of difficulties at work. To elaborate more on the job aspect, in workplaces, more than half of people with mental health disorders don't get treatment due to not wanting to lose their job. Also, more than 1/3 of individuals are afraid of being retaliated against if they were to think to seek treatment. Self-stigma also plays a role in affecting one's mental health because people with mental illnesses see how the public reacts to mental health. Due to the negative attitudes, these individuals apply the misconception onto themselves, which can further isolate, increase symptoms, and reduce self-esteem. What can be done to stop the misconceptions of mental illness? The most important way to stop the stigma is to educate people about mental illness and to make sure reports or information is accurate and balanced. One of the ways to have accurate information is to use appropriate terminology when discussing about certain disorders instead of negative wording. Some examples are schizo, psycho, or happy pills. Additionally, the media must humanize mental illness to make the general public truly understand the impacts certain mental disorders have on people's lives. Lastly, the media has to encourage others to speak out and to seek treatment if someone does have a mental illness. To elaborate more on the encouraging to seek treatment, stigmas are also associated with the mental health professionals and treatments. For instance, people have negative attitudes towards the drugs prescribed by professionals because of the psychiatrist and patient relationship. The way to encourage people to seek treatment is to erase the stigmas surrounding psychiatric help. Also, people should openly talk about mental health services as if it was any other health service. In conclusion, the stigmas are surrounding mental health impacts the lives of people with mental illnesses. People must understand the complex reality of mental disorders in order to ensure that individuals with mental illnesses are able to get treatment and to change the attitudes of others. And here are my sources that I used for this presentation. Thank you.